All right, we are ready to finish this thing up. So we're only really going to need a few more lines using our straight edge and our T-square, just a few more architectural details, and then we're going to start adding in some of the more organic, free-form or irregular shaped objects, the trees, the cars, the clouds, and those sorts of details. So we're really just finishing up the doors and creating this little curb and landscaping bed here along the edge. It's probably a little bit hard to see. It's the image printed pretty dark, so hang with me and I think it will hopefully make some sense to you as we go along. Our doors here, as you can see, are recessed into the wall, and we're going to need some vertical lines to divide up door from window. And so we're just going to grab our T-square, and really we're just going to do a little estimating here. The space for the first vertical is going to be a little bit larger than the depth here that we've created. And we're going to do a double line to show the frame, and then scoot over and do another double line, another line to show the next door. And then a fairly skinny space here, we're going to add another double line. And then the other door sort of disappears behind our wall here. We're going to need an orthogonal line that goes to that vanishing point on the left side for the crossbar here, and that is going to fall about a third of the way up the height of the door. So if we envision, just going to estimate, if we divided that up into thirds, what that would look like. It's going to be somewhere in here. And so we're just going to line up to that left vanishing point. And again, we're going to make that a double line. Okay. Now this funky little red pad here is really just a kind of a parking curb, sort of prevents people from driving up too close to the door, and it kind of rounds the corner into a little bit of a landscaping bed there, and that runs parallel to this right-hand wall. So we're going to need both vanishing points for this. It comes out really right in there at that door, and so we're going to go to that right-hand vanishing point, line up to that door, and just shoot out this way. And we're not quite sure how far out to go, so we'll just make it longer than what we need it to be. And then we're going to stay lined up with that right-hand vanishing point, and we're going to draw this curb that runs along the side wall here. And I'm going to make that a double thick line as well. Okay. Now we're going to come over here to our left-hand vanishing point and finish this thing off. And you just have to sort of estimate about where you think that is going to happen. And I'm going to do another one back here at the corner of the building. Both of those lines coming off of the left-hand vanishing point. Now you might be thinking, this isn't square here, it's round. Well, that's really easy to fix. We're just going to come in here and round off that corner. And that's going to establish that curb. Okay, so that's our landscaping bed. Now right here at the corner of the door, almost coming straight out, is kind of that division between what's this pad here and what is grass over here. So that's going to show that space where those trees can begin. And that is really it for architectural details, things that we need the straight edge and the T-square to draw. Now we're going to get into some of those other details. So now we need to take a close look at our trees. And even before I worry about where our trunks are, I want to think about where this foliage is, where it intersects with the things around it. I might start with this first tree trunk here. I know it comes right up at the corner, and then it actually overlaps this part of the door here. And I'm just going to really loose and light kind of sketch where I believe that space should be. This closest one is the biggest of the trees, it's the widest of the trees, and it fans out the most. Partly because it's closer to us, and then also partly because it is a different type of tree than the other four or so, and it's gonna have just a different shape to it. The others are more tall and skinny. I'm just drawing a few little branches in here. I'm not gonna get too worried about minute details on these. We can be a little bit more light and loose on the trees. It's all gonna come out as we fill in with paint when we go to paint this. But I do need to know where to not paint building and where to leave space for my trees. Okay, so there is the first tree and where it overlaps the building. I'm just going to pick up here where I left off with my foliage. It kind of comes up, sort of tall, and then starts to wrap down, light and loose. And then it kind of pops back up again with another tree back here, and even a little higher there. Part of what I've already drawn is covered up, and that's okay. All the way down, almost to the ground. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trunks actually in there. So they're going to be fairly close together and fairly skinny as well. 3, 4, and 5. Of course, where we have the foliage of the tree, we want to go ahead and erase those details of the building. Hopefully you drew those nice and light so that you can erase fairly well. And you can kind of evaluate, is that about the space that you wanted those trees to take up? You can always add more or less if you feel like you want to. Maybe I want to come up a little higher here. I can do that pretty easy. So, and then of course the trees have to overlap, come down past the wall, because they are closer to us than the wall. So make sure you bring those trunks all the way down into that little bed there. Okay, so that's pretty good layout for our trees, I think. You can play around with if you want to get a little bit more detailed on those trees and whatnot, but basically we just want an overall shape. We can always play around with the texture a little bit more when we are painting some of those details. You'll notice it's a little darker on the foliage right around the bottom of the trees, but we'll get into some of that when we get ready to paint. Okay, we got a trash can here at the corner, so that's going to be 2 parallel lines, 2 vertical parallel lines. The bottom of the trash can and the top of the trash can are what we call an ellipse. That means they are sort of like a flattened circle, or most people would call that an oval. But technically speaking, that is an ellipse, which is more of a mathematical term. And that's going to overlap the corner of the building right in there. And then the other big feature, of course, are the cars. Now there are a couple of curbs, a couple of parking curbs in here, and those just run along side with the building. You could use your straight edge to draw those, but they're pretty small details. We don't need to necessarily get bogged down in that. Now, I want to think about scale and size here on my cars. So if I notice that the blue car takes up almost all of this space in here, it doesn't quite make it to the end of the building, but it does come all the way to that third line over, that third space, and then of course it comes down onto the ground where it's gonna overlap the edge of the building down onto the parking lot. And then before I get too detailed on that, I want to go ahead and get my scale and my size on this other car. If I draw it too precisely and then I realize that the size is wrong, then I'm going to be frustrated. So I like to kind of map out loosely my scale and my size and decide if I'm where I want to be before I get too detailed. So, but I can kind of live with that. I think that's all right. I can come in here, draw a few of those details, not get too bogged down here. We're going to be painting these things, and we're probably not going to be that precise, frankly, when it comes to some of these details. When it gets to watercolor, we just want an overall impression of these being cars, but we don't necessarily have to be able to make out the make and model of them. Unless you are a super fan, you probably don't feel too strongly about what kind of car Pam drove. And of course, everybody knows that Michael drove a Sebring with the convertible top. So that's what we see there parked next to Pam. So at the art show, Michael is pretty excited when he sees that their vehicles are both present in her drawing. Okay, I think we're in pretty good shape here on the cars. We have just enough detail without getting too bogged down. On the clouds here, of course, they're clouds. They don't have to be super precise, but for my own sake, I like to just very lightly draw in some shapes. This helps me know where to try to avoid adding paint, because I want to make sure that I'm keeping these areas nice and bright and white, at least partly so. So I don't worry too much about precision, but just overall shape and feel. And also just kind of space, how much space are the clouds taking up. So again, there's nothing too precise about that. You can be much more so precise if you're interested in doing so. And one of the things, because of the way we set this up, we ended up with a lot of extra room over here because I wanted to have that vanishing point as reference. So really our drawing compared to the inspiration image, we have about 5 extra inches here. So just for our own sake, if we want to mark that off so we know kind of what we're dealing with, we can do that. So we see here, we have a little cloud visible back here. We're just going for a loose overall texture when we get ready to paint the sky. And there is not a horizon line exactly, but a tree line back here that we want to make sure we establish, because that's going to be green versus the gray that we see there in the parking lot. And then the same thing is true over here. We have a tree line back here in the distance. Okay, so that is it for the drawing. I'm pretty pleased with my drawing. I hope you are pleased with yours. We will take this and we will do some painting to finish this guy up.